Hello F11 members and welcome to the Fundamentals of Post-Production's video tutorials for issue 54, July 2016. Back in May, I went over to the Brecon Beacons with F11 member Chris Davis. Now, I don't know if you remember from the members gallery a few months ago when we announced the winners of the Your Vision 2016 competition, but Chris Davis won the portfolio category, and part of his prize was to spend a day with me on a one-to-one tuition and photographic session, and Chris opted to do it in the Brecon Beacons. Now, Chris, you'll see some of his pictures from our day together in this month's members gallery, some excellent pictures, and I have to say I was very much inspired by Chris's use of black and white work. We had quite flat, dull lighting in the Brecon Beacons, but we turned it to our advantage. And Chris did some great shots along the Brecon to Monmouth Canal, and also in this valley of the waterfalls in the Eastern Brecon Beacons National Park. So, inspired by Chris, I've gone back and looked at one of my pictures from that shoot, and here you see it on the screen in front of you. It is the snow waterfall, it's called, Sgideriera. I think it is in Welsh. For our Welsh F11 members, I apologise for my atrocious Welsh pronunciation there, but it's a beautiful valley, and I know the Brecon Beacons well, have photographed in that valley many times, and yet I was really interested to go back there again with Chris and revisited it, and this was the result. So let's go back to the starting point, and this is the image straight out of the camera, the raw image, untouched, and I'm looking at it if you look at it in library module here, I experimented with getting my tripod out into the middle of the river to get the water rushing around my tripod legs, and my exposure was 8 seconds at f16. I used a 0.9 neutral density filter plus a polarizer. The beauty of the picture, though, is the location, just the wonderful fresh green foliage of the Brecon Beacons in the late spring, early summer. Now, it's worked well as a colour image. I do like that incredible verdancy of the green, but I was stimulated by Chris's use of black and white to give it a go myself. And so what we're going to do now is work through the decision-making process that I use when I'm converting images to black and white. My starting point is, if I go in Lightroom's Develop module here, is to actually use the Lightroom black and white filter presets and work through the options and see what appeals most. Now, what I'm looking for here is not a preset which is going to give me the end result I'm looking for. It's more a starting point. So if I work through the various options here, the blue filter does some strange things to the image tonally that I'm not totally keen on, so I don't think blue is going to be the option here. The green filter, because there's so much green in the image, has quite an interesting effect. What it replicates is if we were to put a green filter over the lens of a camera shooting in black and white, it would tend to make the greens look lighter and all the other colours in the image look darker. And sure enough, that is what has happened here. Now, the image as is looks too bright. Nevertheless, I like the appealing, fresh, quite bright look of the vegetation using the green filter there. Using the infrared filter does the same sort of thing in a way. It tries to replicate the look of shooting with an infrared adapted filter. much too bright, but of course I could do something about that. And the orange filter doesn't do that much. The red filter, not for me in this particular case, nor the yellow filter. And then just work through the other options here. High contrast. I quite like this image with as much contrast as possible. Just 1 second. So low contrast just looks too soft and muddy. And then the various different options, look 1, look 2, look 3. Again, just choose what is nearest to what you like best and then use that as a starting point to work on. But what I'm going to do is actually go back to the green filter and use that as my starting point. Now, let's just see what the green filter preset has done to the image. It's altered the white balance of the shot. It's actually pulled back the highlights, pulled back the blacks a little bit as well. I can, of course, come back and readjust any of these, and will certainly do so. It's given a bit of clarity, it's introduced a bit of clarity into the image here. And then if I come down here into the black and white mix, it's actually boosted yellows, greens and aquas in the image. And what else has it done? That's about it. So what I'm going to do now is fine-tune these adjustments to my own tastes. And as usual, the first thing I'm going to do is just look at the image and adjust my blacks and my white points as I would with any other image. And in fact, if I hold down my Alt slider and move the blacks to the left, I can't go very far before I start clipping more blacks. Nevertheless, I can go a little bit more to -13. And the same with the whites. Hold down Alt, move the whites to the right, and I can go all the way to about +16, actually a bit less. Only about +6 before I start losing information in my highlights. That's made the image, just introduced a bit more contrast to the image. But I'm now going to come down and look at the overall darkness or brightness of the picture now. Using the tone curve, I'm just going to pull that down to the right until I get the density that I want, the darkness that I want. It's going to be somewhere around that. But actually, there's a disparity because the bottom half of the image is looking pretty good, really, about the kind of density I want, but the top sort of third of the image is still too bright. I do like this detail to the left of the image as well there. One thing I'm going to do at this stage is just come right down to the bottom of my develop module here. Come down to where it says lens corrections, okay? Now the thing is that if I just click on and off my enable profile corrections, what it does is pick up what lens I've used here. It's the 24 to 70 millimeter lens, and it's correcting not just for any kind of aberrations or distortion, but more importantly in this particular case for diffraction, for unequal coverage. What we've got here is all lenses are brighter in the middle than they are at the edge, and in this particular case it's quite marked. If I click on and off the lens profile corrections, you can see the periphery of the edge of the image is quite dark without the profile corrections applied. Now that sometimes is a good thing, sometimes that's quite appealing, but in this particular case I prefer it to be as even as possible coverage, and particularly because I like the detail in this part of the image. So I'm going to apply my profile corrections there, And now go back to my tone curve, pull that down a bit more until I get the density that I want in the picture. There's some really rich blacks and some clean whites in this image, which make it very appealing in black and white. And I would say within this part of the image there, the bottom part and the left part, I'm quite happy with that. But the top right, for me, is a bit too bright. So I'm actually going to use the grad tool here, and rather than pull it down from the top, I'm going to pull it down on a sort of diagonal angle here so that it affects this area of the image. And of course I can fine tune this as always. And I'm just going to now introduce, take those shadows off, introduce a bit of darkness into that area of the image there. Now I don't want to make it look too muddy, so I'm going to also put in a bit of contrast as well. Positive contrast and negative exposure, and that's having quite a marked effect. It's pulling in that top right of the image quite well. Yeah, I find with black and white work I always use more corrections, more adjustments than I do, more extreme adjustments than I do in black and in colour. And really, if I now quite a bit of contrast on that top edge to just hold the image in really. How much negative exposure, around about minus 0.68 looks good to me there. And I'm also going to pull back my highlights as well a touch, because there's just a bit of clipping taking place there. And that looks good to me, so I click on done. And now all I need to do really is just look at the last adjustment that's to be made, and that's clarity. Now the Lightroom preset has put in plus 24 of clarity. Let's just take that back out and make an informed decision on what clarity is doing. Just looking at the whole image, if I put loads of clarity in, it basically boosts local contrast. In this particular case, I think that's too much, but a bit of clarity may be of use. Going the other way, a lot of people like negative clarity in their black and white. It's almost like using a diffusing filter. Softens the image, can be quite appealing. But in this, I personally though, what I like about black and white work is the fine detail of what we have, of which we have so much in this particular image, can look almost more crisp, almost sharper in black and white than it can in colour. And look at this lovely fine detail that we have here in this image. If I zoom into 100%. Of course, I shot the picture on the Canon 5 DSR with its huge 50 megapixel sensor. The clarity, the sharpness, the amount of detail in the picture is really quite stunning. And the big question now is, do I want to boost that clarity or just soften it off a bit? So what I want to do is, I think, put a bit in. How much? Well, again, I would be very wary of doing this in colour. I don't like the look in colour, but in black and white, I think it certainly has its uses. And I'm going to go to about plus 34 there. Let's just zoom in there. And if I now go back to my history and take that clarity out and put it back in again, it's a subjective thing, this clarity. I'm just going to trim that back a little bit. I think maybe plus 34 is too much. I'm going to go plus 28. And now at this stage, I look at that image and I think, well, I'm pretty pleased with how that has worked out. I think it's a lovely black and white image, and there's some wonderful tonal quality to it. if I just finish now by sharpening the picture, I can just use the sharpen preset there to sharpen the picture, and that's it. That's the picture done. With black and white conversions, there's no wrongs, there's no rights, it's purely subjective. But it pays to experiment, but also really think about what you're doing rather than just adjusting the preset you like best. Okay, that's it for part 1. We'll see you in part 2 for more explorations of the fundamentals of post-production.